Okay, so this is a story you guys won't believe, but trust me, it's 100% true. It's like one of those cartoons where a light bulb goes off over someone's head, and that's exactly what happened to me. Turns out, my youngest daughter, Marissa, isn't my daughter at all. She's the daughter of another man. I'm on the phone with this rep from genealogyrist.com, trying to figure out why Marissa's DNA test hadn't been processed after 10 weeks. I got her the test for Christmas and gave the rep all the info to track it down. After about 5 minutes on hold, he tells me it's been processed. Plus, it's private between the company and the person who submitted the test, so he can't share any info. But if it's been processed, why isn't she showing up in my DNA results? I ask, getting a little panicked. Sir, there are a number of reasons why your daughter's DNA results might not match, but I'm not authorized to discuss that particular test with you, he says, sounding a little annoyed. And that's when the light bulb went off. The number one reason she wasn't showing up in my matches is because she's not a match. I ended the call in a total daze. I remember pushing the red end call button, then I remember starting to cry. I woke up a few minutes later, curled up in a fetal position on the living room sofa. I still had 15 minutes left in my lunch break, so I called Marissa, who was probably also on lunch because she works the same hours as me. She usually curls up with a book at her desk, so I wasn't worried about interrupting anything. She answered on the first ring. "Hey Dad, what's up?" she asks, sounding a little wary. "Pumpkin, I know I love and trust you completely, but I know what's going on with that DNA test. I lie. I called genealogy gurus, and they said they processed it about 2 weeks ago." There's a gasp on her end, then silence for at least 10 seconds. "You know, Dad, we need to talk, but I can't talk right now. Call me tonight, and don't be in the same room as Mom when you call." I was in a fog driving back to the office, and I'll admit, I didn't give my boss a very productive afternoon at the tech company where I work. There was just so much going through my mind, so many questions, and the thought that my little girl wasn't my little girl. Being an analytical kind of guy, I knew I had to prioritize my thinking and then address each issue one at a time. I didn't become the vice president of engineering at Sikafus Electronics for no reason, and at this point, I knew the best thing for me was to treat these personal issues as if they were project issues and solve them in an orderly fashion. The old man Dwayne Sikafus taught me that himself when he hired me right out of Purdue to work for his fledgling company. With Dwayne at the helm, and me always at his right hand, Sikafus blossomed into a top company in the industry, and we both profited handsomely. I made good money, had great benefits, and worked with smart, fantastic people. And then things were even better when I went home at night to my beautiful, sexy wife and 3 great kids. Eventually, the kids grew up, left home, got married, and started having their own kids. We were a little lonely at first, being home alone with grown kids, but we found plenty to keep us busy, and for me, being alone again reinvigorated us as a couple. But looking back at the last month of my life, I realize a few small incidents, including a phone call Marissa made to my wife about 2 weeks ago. We were both in the living room, watching TV one Tuesday night, when Tracy's phone rang. She looked at the phone and told me it was Marissa, and then answered. The conversation lasted about 5 minutes, Tracy answering with mostly yeses and nos, and I could see tears welling up in the corners of her eyes. She hung up. I asked if everything was all right, and she told me that Marissa's cat was having some health issues. "Nothing to be concerned about," she said, although I noticed she seemed a little agitated being around me. I thought it was odd that she cared so much about Marissa's cat's health. So that phone call must have been when Marissa found out. Tracy had no idea about me sending Marissa the test. I didn't even think it was remarkable. Marissa was the only one of our 3 kids who was curious about family history, so I bought a kit online and sent it to her. I've been researching my family lineage for years, and I really like the DNA testing part of it. I figured it would be cool for Marissa to get tested. Apparently, I couldn't have been more wrong about that. When I got home, I tried my best not to act differently around Tracy, although inside I was fuming. One problem at a time, I kept telling myself. I met Tracy at Purdue my sophomore year. We didn't start dating until our senior year, but we've been inseparable ever since, or so I thought. We married a year after graduation, 31 years ago, and to this day I tell anyone who will listen that it was the best decision I ever made. She's still stunning at 54, and even though we have 3 kids, she still works out regularly and has the body of a woman in her mid-30s. And she's both fun and funny, and to this day I look forward to spending the rest of my life with this woman. Around 8 o'clock I told Tracy that I needed to call the old man about a project we were working on and excused myself from the room. In reality, I grabbed a jacket and went outside to the porch swing so I could talk without Tracy overhearing, and then I called Marissa. Marissa answered right after the first ring and sounded completely distraught. "I'm sorry, Dad. I know I should have told you sooner, but Mom said I wasn't supposed to tell you anything until she had a chance to talk to you first," she blurted out before I could even say hello. "I'm not mad at you. Calm down," I said as gently as I could. "I'm not accusing you of anything. You're just a victim here, just like me." I could hear her heavy breathing through the phone. I knew this was killing her. "Riss, I want you to know that this doesn't change anything between us. I'm still your father, and you're still my pumpkin. I've always given you all the love I have, and after all this time, I wouldn't stop now assuming you don't want me to stop." At that point, she completely broke down, sobbing uncontrollably into the phone. "I love you, Dad. I wouldn't want anyone else. There's my pumpkin. Hey, I don't want to put you in the middle of this, but you're my best source of information about the DNA thing. We're not going to discuss anything else so you're not in the middle, but I need to know, did you get any DNA matches?" "Yeah, Dad, I did," she sighed. "Amanda Anderson came up as my half-sister." "Mandy. George and Jeannie's Mandy. Oh, hell." "I'm sorry, Dad," she whispered. "It's not your fault, pumpkin. You never need to apologize to me," I said as calmly as I could. That meant George Anderson, my kid's Uncle George, Judge George Anderson to the rest of the world, was Marissa's biological father. Holy crap. That meant my wife had been sleeping with her boss when he was a lawyer at the law firm of Gooey Howe and Associates. That means it was at least 25 years ago, when Marissa was only 24. Tracy would have been his manager at the time. He'd left the firm to become a state judge several years later, moving to the state capital, before his career really took off. But for her part, Tracy didn't continue with George, opting instead to stay with Gooey Howe and eventually become the office manager. But during the couple of years George and Tracy worked together, he and his wife, Jeannie, had become such good friends that the kids still called them Uncle and Aunt, and they called me and Tracy the same. And many times when I'd be out of town, Tracy and the kids would visit George and Jeannie for a few days at their lake house. Oh hell! The kids have even mentioned a number of times how Aunt Jeannie took them here or there, without mentioning Uncle George or Mom being there, and I didn't even think twice about it. Damn. I must have been zoning out at that point, because I heard Marissa calling me Dad. "Dad?" "I'm sorry, pumpkin. I was lost in my thoughts. Thanks for the help, kid. Say hi to Drew." "Wait, Dad, what are you going to do?" That was a fair question, but I didn't have a good answer, so I just told her the truth. "Not sure yet, kid. Just don't go do anything stupid, Dad. A little stupid is okay, but don't get caught or anything." I hadn't even thought about shooting Tracy until that point, but I promised Marissa I wouldn't get caught, so I guess that took shooting out of the equation. I never break a promise to my kids. Reassuring Marissa about our relationship was my #1 priority, and finding out who Tracy's accomplice was became my second priority. Priority #3 was going to be initiating my divorce proceedings after finding a new lawyer, because my current lawyer belonged to the same firm where Tracy worked. That certainly wouldn't be productive. After I settled with a lawyer, I would then address Mrs. Clark Walters, my soon-to-be ex-wife. Things at home were chilly. Whenever we were together, Tracy was chattering like a magpie. I guess it was nervous energy. She seemed to be trying her hardest to keep me happy, thinking that might soften the blow when I found out. I don't know. But there was definitely a distance between us, and she wasn't going to be the one to break the silence. I met with a lawyer about a week later, and when he found out my wife was the office manager at Gooey Howe, he looked really worried. So I moved on to the next lawyer on my list, a woman in her late 20s, who just smiled when I mentioned Tracy being the office manager at Gooey Howe. That's what I was looking for, someone who wouldn't be intimidated when one of Gooey's big attorneys stepped up to represent my wife. I laid out what little I knew about the affair, starting, of course, with the discovery that my youngest daughter wasn't my biological daughter, and that she was the daughter of Judge Anderson. Judge Anderson of the Court of Appeals, my lawyer, Marie Barnett, asked. That's the one, I replied, watching her face to see if I needed to find a different lawyer. This is good, was all she said, and then we moved on to discussing financial considerations. Because we both had good jobs with good pensions and benefits, Marie suggested we should split the marital assets, keeping our own pensions, and selling the house. That would leave us both well off, although I would be in slightly better shape because I had the higher income and better pension. Unless you really want to crush her, for the affair, for the kids, or just for the general disrespect, she quickly added, taking a brief moment as if she might jump up on the conference table to try to right the wrong that I was experiencing. We'll figure that out, I'm sure, but I don't want to hurt her financially, I replied. What about the judge? Are we going to sue him for anything? Because if we do, things will get much more complicated and it will jack up your bill considerably. The judge is my problem, and I'll deal with him in the way I see fit, I snapped, probably a little too harshly. I understand, she replied. If she doesn't fight it, it could take 6 months, Marie noted. If she fights it, we could be looking at over a year. I'm not in a hurry, so let's just take our time and work it out, I told her. After completing task number 3, it was time to move on to task number 4, the confrontation. I waited another week, just to see if Trass's head would explode in the meantime. Saturday nights were our usual date night, after which we would come home, watch a movie, and have sex. But Saturday night sex was always special, because we'd go to bed early so we had more time for what was usually a screaming orgasm fest for my wife, because I usually took her to about 10 orgasms with my hands and mouth before I entered her. We were usually both exhausted when we were done and would just hold each other for a long time before getting up to clean up. However, we hadn't had a date night in 2 weeks and hadn't had sex in the same amount of time, because I couldn't bring myself to do it. After finding out about the affair in Marissa, Tracy hadn't even asked about it, another sign that she knew I knew, but she was really good at feigning bashfulness. But that was about to end. I took her to an upscale French restaurant, we split a bottle of wine, and even had some great dessert. She was more cheerful than I'd seen her in recent weeks. Then, when we got home, I gently removed her jacket, led her to the kitchen, pulled a chair for her, and uttered those famous words, "We need to talk." Tracia kind of smiled at me while I poured myself a Jack Daniels on the rocks and offered her something from the liquor cabinet, which she politely declined. I set my drink down on the counter, looked straight into her eyes, and said, "The floor is yours." So that was a long time ago, Clark. George and I haven't slept together in about 20 years. Can't we just consider that a mistake from the distant past and move on? Well, I have to admit, I was glad she wasn't trying to say the DNA test was wrong, but was attempting to get out of it by saying it was so long ago that it didn't matter anymore. Really? Okay, so the last time you guys had sex was about 20 years ago. When did you guys start having sex? How often? And why did you guys stop eventually? I want it all. But first I need to know if the first and second kids are his. No, Clark. Barry and Katie are yours. I didn't even sleep with George until about a year after Katie was born. That relationship lasted about 3 years at first, and then we stopped when George decided to leave the firm and climb the judicial ladder. It waited about a year after we stopped to apply for his first judgeship because he wanted to make sure the background check would prove he was clean. And then we only slept together a few times at the lake house, when Jeannie accidentally took all the kids out for an afternoon. Jeannie didn't know at the time, although George eventually told her, and then the 3 of us had a peaceful meeting where both George and I promised her that it would never happen again. Why didn't you tell me, and instead tried to reconcile with me? What am I, chopped liver? I asked harshly. Trashy wiped her hands on her sleeve and replied, I knew I could never tell you. You would have divorced me immediately, and I certainly didn't want that. I love you. I still love you. Apparently you love George more, I said. Start and stop on his command without a thought. I was your backup. No, Clark, I love you with all my heart, she pleaded. No, you love him with all your heart. You loved him so much that you gave him up so he could pursue his career aspirations, while still knowing you were just his backup plan. Maybe you loved me a little back then, but you knew I totally worshipped the ground you walked on, and you trusted that and our family to ride out this loss. Tracy looked down at her lap. The truth hurts, and I knew I'd hit a nerve. But what about Marissa? It's pretty clear that he was seeing her without a condom, and you had to know that could lead somewhere, and it did. I just figured that because you both have brown hair, brown eyes, and fair skin, nobody would ever know. And I knew you wouldn't have any reason to think she wasn't yours. So when she came along looking like me, I didn't have to worry about it until you went and got her that damn NA test. Honestly, I didn't know before that. So this is my fault, I asked, incredulously. No. George and I did discuss the possibility, but I told him he didn't need to worry because we looked so much alike. Last I knew, he didn't know either, but I'm sure Mandy told him by now. I haven't heard from him in at least a couple of years since we were at Marissa's wedding to Drew 2 years ago. Well, regardless of who knew what, Marissa is still mine to me, and that's what I told her. I have my name on the birth certificate, I raised her, I love her, she's mine. George better not get any ideas about that, and if he calls you, better tell him that. And by the way, I'm going to get the other 2 kids tested as soon as possible. I need that peace of mind. Clark, Tracy shrieked. I told you they were yours. And you expect me to believe you. Why? I countered. More than anything, Tracy was totally shocked by my newly discovered lack of trust. What the hell did she expect? But I knew she was also extremely uncomfortable with my telling the other 2 kids about her affair. No one wants to look like a slut in front of their kids. So how many times did you do it, and where? At least tell me the whole story, I reproached. We didn't plan this, Clark. It just kind of happened. We spent a lot of time working together, then we became friends, and it just kind of went from there. He was nice, attentive, witty, funny, passionate, and we connected on a deeper level. But because we both had significant others that we both loved, we kept things minimal and moved our meeting locations, usually out of town. No, we never met here or at his house. That would be wrong on so many levels. But that didn't stop you from sleeping together a few times at the lake house, after the relationship was supposedly over, while Jeannie was out with the kids for an afternoon? I mused. No, not like that, she almost whispered at me. But I swear to you we haven't been intimate since then. And Jeannie knows all this, and has forgiven both of you? I asked, shaking my head in disbelief. Yes, I told you that. I don't think I can, I blurted out, my voice cracking with raw emotion. We know what we did was wrong, Clark, but it was 20 years ago, and you were never hurt by it while it was happening, so can't we just go back to how things were just a few weeks ago? You're my loving husband, and I'm your loving wife. Nothing needs to change. Tracy started crying at that point. I hated when she did that, and I usually tried to comfort her, but this time was different. I went into the living room and turned on the TV, leaving her in the kitchen. So we slept in the same bed that night, but for the first time in recent memory, we didn't sleep next to each other. I moved as far away from her as I could on the king-size bed and prevented her from sliding towards me when she got in. She looked shocked and hurt. I didn't care. Tracy made us a great breakfast Sunday morning, and while we were eating, I brought up the subject of divorce. It was 20 years ago. You didn't even know about it. For God's sake. It's over, now let's move on with our lives, she nearly yelled at me. Wrong is wrong, no matter how long ago it was, I yelled back at her. You deceived me, you lied to me, you betrayed me, and you broke my trust. It's not a matter of time. I got up from the table, leaving half my plate of food, and went outside to cut the grass. That was the last time I spoke to Tracy until dinner on Wednesday, when she told me Jeannie Anderson was coming to visit us next weekend. Needless to say, I wasn't thrilled, but Jeannie was an old, close friend and had endured the same deceit as I had, so I figured I owed her the courtesy of a conversation. Jeannie showed up Friday night, at 6 after a 2-hour drive from her house. She didn't bring George with her. Tracy had made stuffed pork tenderloin with mashed potatoes, and I'd picked up a couple of bottles of Merlot to go with it. Conversation was light and friendly during dinner, and then we retreated to the living room with our glasses of wine for what I assumed was the main event. Jeannie started telling the story of the affair as if it were a piece of history, very matter-of-fact and unemotional, but the more she talked, the more she got emotional, and both she and Tracy were in tears. When George told me about the affair, I think it was over for a couple of years, and he promised me it would never happen again, Jeannie said. I have to admit, I was pretty devastated at first, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized that because it had ended before I knew, I guess I wasn't really hurt that much. And because I knew Jeannie wasn't a gold digger, I guess I could see how it could have happened. George's personality is pretty intoxicating, right? Although I didn't find out about Marissa until a few weeks ago when everyone else did, I guess. I'm really sorry about that, Clark. Jeannie never mentioned the few times Tracy and George got together after the main affair had ended at the Anderson Lake house. I wondered if they even told her about that. I wouldn't have. But I did think that George must have been a good lawyer, because Jeannie was almost apologizing for George having the affair instead of being mad at him. So unfortunately for Tracy, I wasn't like Jeannie, and I wasn't buying her act either, because I wasn't ready to give Tracy and George the same fortune, the same past that Jeannie had, even if their affair had ended 20 years ago. I just think back to what my life would be like if I had left him, and how different things would have been for me and the girls, she continued. They say you should always consider whether your life would be better or worse if you left your significant other, and I know my life would be worse. Thanks for sharing that with me, Jeannie. It's definitely food for thought. I'll certainly have to consider that, although there are a few factors I need to take into account, including the fact that, unlike you, I wasn't told about the affair. I discovered it quite by accident. Tracy knew it was wrong when she did it, and she knew what my reaction would be. So she figured it was clearly best for everyone involved if I never knew, and just lived in blissful ignorance. And that's what would have happened if it wasn't for the test. So now, 20 years later, I find out that the center of my world had been in love with another man, been intimate with him, then become a saint, and left him for his career, and just assumed that I would just move on. Right, Tracy? My wife didn't say anything throughout Jeannie's speech. She just sat there calmly while Jeannie told her story. She would sneak glances over at me throughout the time, trying to gauge my reaction. She didn't realize I knew she was watching, so I just sat there silently while Jeannie talked, just to make Tracy a little crazy. My reaction to Jeannie's story wasn't what Tracy wanted, nor was it what Jeannie wanted. They looked at each other with pain in their eyes. I just shook my head and went into the kitchen, poured myself another glass of wine, returned to the living room, and turned on the big screen, signaling to both of them that I was done for the evening. The ladies understood and moved into the den, where I could hear them talking quietly. When whatever I was watching ended, I turned off the TV, stuck my head into the den, said goodbye, and went upstairs to our bedroom. Jeannie cornered me alone in the living room on Saturday and said we needed to talk. I didn't know where Trashy was, but I agreed, and we retreated to the formal den and sat down on the 2 chairs in the corner. Clark, I understand your pain, I really do, but forgiving Tracy and getting divorced would be a terrible mistake for both of you, Jeannie started. You love her and she loves you. That's all that matters. The rest is history, and for the 2 of you to spend the rest of your lives apart because of something that happened 20 years ago would be awful. If I can forgive George, surely you can forgive Tracy. Honestly, I don't know if I can, Jeannie. Like I said yesterday, I wasn't told about the affair, you were. I wasn't told because she knew it was wrong, and I wouldn't have forgiven her then. Why should I forgive her now? She's been lying to me for 20 years. She's been having affairs for years and lying to me for another 20. How can I ever forgive her? How can I ever trust her again? I shook my head, got up, and left the room, passing Tracy in the hallway. She clearly knew about my discussion with Jeannie, and she could see by my face that I wasn't budging an inch. Saturday night dinner was a very quiet affair. The ladies tried to make small talk. I didn't want to talk. I didn't say 3 words during the entire meal. After a quick thank you, I grabbed a jacket and went outside, telling the ladies I was going to Malone's, my favorite place to have a quiet drink. When I got to Malone's, Ronnie, the woman who owns the bar, was chatting with some other patrons in the far corner. Instead of taking a seat at the bar, as I normally did when I went in, I sat alone at a table, feeling dejected and looking worse for wear. Apparently, Marnie, the bartender, came over with my usual Crown Black on the rocks and commented that I looked like my dog had just died. Close, but no cigar. Just my marriage, I chuckled. Marnie went over to Ronnie and whispered something in her ear. Ronnie excused herself from the patrons at the end of the bar and came over to me, taking the seat across from me at my table. "All right, Superman, spill it," she said. Ronnie is about my age, a big Irish woman with freckles and red hair, which she wears as a badge of honor. She takes no guff from anyone, but in case anyone tries to give it to her, her husband, Moose, is cooking in the back. Moose is about 6'3" and 280 pounds, and is a former Marine drill instructor. Malone's isn't a rough place, But well, things can get out of hand sometimes in a bar, but I've only seen it happen once. The offender had made a remark to Ronnie, and when she called him out on it, he wasn't smart enough to shut his mouth. Moose punched him, then held the jerk on the floor with his foot until the cops arrived to clean things up. Ronnie calls me Superman because of my name. She says it reminds her of Clark Kent, and she swears to everyone that even though I'm a good guy with a good job, she doesn't want to see me get angry. We always laugh about it a lot. I've been going to Malone's for 20 years, sometimes with Tracy, sometimes without, sometimes for food, sometimes just for a drink. Ronnie and Moose have gotten to know both Tracy and me, and she can read people including me pretty well. She's kind of the sister I never had. Tracy and I are done, I started. I hadn't told anyone yet, and I have to admit, I felt a little relieved to finally get it off my chest. I found out she's been cheating on me with her boss for the past 20 years. Not once, not several times, but for 4 years. My youngest, Marissa, is his. And she thought that because it happened so long ago, and I didn't know when it was happening, that I should just accept it and move on. She said she loves me, still does, and doesn't want a divorce. That cheating bitch, Ronnie exclaimed. How dare she? Now you're not just going to back down and let her stay, are you? If that happened to me and Moose, he'd have me tied to the wall, and that guy's hide would be peeled off with it. It felt good to have Ronnie agreeing with me. I really appreciate her no-nonsense, straight-shooting way of looking at things, and if she thought differently, I would definitely have to rethink my stance. Look, Superman, this is more about respect than anything else. I love Tracy, I love Tracy, but her deception definitely wasn't born out of love and certainly not out of respect. How could she let you think that another man's child was yours all those years? I explained the Marissa story to Ronnie, pointing out that she didn't really know for sure, but Ronnie wasn't buying it, pointing out that not taking the kid to get tested was a convenient way of saying she didn't want to know. Did she ever apologize for the affair, or did she just say she was sorry for hurting you? Damn, this woman is good. She never apologized for the affair. I don't even think she was really sorry for hurting me. I think the only thing she's truly sorry about is that I found out, I said. I can't tell you what to do, Superman, but I think she already told you what to do. So I'm sorry, Clark. Moose and I will cover the crown tonight. The rest of the bottle is yours, and we'll call you a cab at the end of the night. Give me your keys. I did as I was told. The cab driver dropped me off at home around 2 in the morning. Tracy greeted us at the door and helped me up the stairs to our bedroom. I collapsed onto the bed, still wearing my clothes. Tracy took off my shoes and socks, and then I fell asleep. Late Wednesday afternoon, I got a call from my son at the office. He wanted to talk to me about the situation with Tracy. He didn't say it, but it was clear Tracy thought he needed to call in the big guns, the kids, to stop me from getting a divorce. My son and I usually see eye to eye about most things, but talking with him, I could tell that Tracy had learned a lot, and it had paid off, because he definitely saw her side of this divorce thing. Dad, divorcing Mom would be the stupidest thing you've done since you wore leisure suits in the 70s, he tried to joke with me. Seriously, Dad. A divorce. Over something Mom did 20 years ago, that you didn't even know about until a few weeks ago. This is the woman you said you loved and wanted to spend the rest of your life with just a few weeks ago, and now you're ready to throw it all away and maybe live the rest of your life alone, just because of one mistake. Seriously, Dad? First, Barry, a mistake would be the first few times she had sex with him. After a few months, it's a decision, not a mistake. And what would you do if you found out Linda was cheating on you? Probably rip her head off. But you didn't catch her. It was all over 20 years ago. The physical acts ended. The deception, the disrespect, that continues, I replied, coldly. Barry, I think you're smart enough to stay out of this and not take sides. But clearly you jumped in where no child should in the middle of your parents. And for what, Barry? I'm not going to change my mind. I'm the one who got hurt here, and you're just making me angry. I worship that woman. I worship the ground she walked on, and she knew it. She never intended to tell me, and if it wasn't for an accident, I would have gone to my grave worshiping her, while she just saw me as the safe choice when the man she loved wouldn't marry her. Am I feeling used, Sonny? You bet your ass I am. Dad, are you being a little dramatic? I think he was still talking when I hung up. Tracy had a great meal prepared when I walked in the door around 6. She didn't look happy when I told her I wasn't hungry, poured myself a little Jack in a glass, turned on the TV, and settled into my favorite recliner. She came in and asked me what was wrong. Same old, same old. My wife cheated on me for 4 years, had a kid with another man, and now my son is telling me I'm the bad guy here? Do me a favor. Call Katie tonight and tell her not to call me tomorrow, unless she wants to get a tongue lashing like Barry. Tracy looked down. You'd think after 31 years, she'd know not to make me mad on her behalf. What in the wide world of sports makes you think this divorce isn't happening? I said, my voice rising. You not only cheated on me for 4 years with another man and had his child, but you replaced me in your heart with him. Can you sit here and tell me that you don't love him? And if he asked you to divorce me and marry him, you wouldn't? And the thing is, you can love me but you don't. You love him. You're just a safe backup plan because you always knew you had my heart, and you'd do anything for me as long as you thought you had me. You deceived me, you lied to me, you didn't respect me, and now you have the audacity to try to turn our kids against me. That's the last straw, Trace. But no, I'm not going to be cruel to her, and especially not to Jeannie, and ruin George's stellar career as a clean judge. I'll file for irreconcilable differences, and we can each keep our own retirement accounts, and split the house and everything else. Tears were rolling down Tracy's cheeks, and as she stood up from her chair, I threw one more thing at her. You've never even told me you were sorry for cheating, probably because you weren't, but at least you were honest about that. The only thing you regret is that I found out, right? I spent the rest of the evening clinging to my bottle of Jack. I called my lawyer the next day and told her she needed to get the divorce papers ready as soon as possible. She told me I could look them over next Tuesday, she could get them ready to file on Wednesday, and Tracy could be served on Thursday. I told her to have her server come to my house that Friday night. I wanted to be there when she was served. And then I called Judge George Anderson's office and told his admin I needed him to call me back regarding an important matter. So he'd know exactly why I was calling, and I knew he'd get back to me as soon as possible. George sounded a little apprehensive when he returned my call about 2 hours later. Yes, he knew exactly why I was calling, although he didn't think he wanted to do this at his office. I fully agreed, and told him I would drive down to his and Jeannie's house next Saturday at 10 in the morning. He didn't know that Tracy wouldn't be served until the night before, although I was sure he'd know by the time I made the 2-hour drive to his palatial home. Over dinner at Malone's Saturday night, Tracy admitted that Jeannie had called her and told her about my meeting with George next Saturday. She wanted to know if I wanted her to come along for the ride. This isn't a social call, Tracy, I said. George and I have some things to talk about, and you don't need to be there. You might want to remember that he's a very well-respected Court of Appeals judge, possibly even on the short list for the Supreme Court one day. Doing some macho thing with him might get you arrested, and besides, you promised me that you wouldn't do anything to harm his career. Right? Pick him over me again. But don't worry, I'll keep my promise. I won't do anything that might knock him off the short list for a Supreme Court judgeship. God forbid, the show must go on. After telling the old man at the office about what was going on in my life, I took some private time and met with my lawyer to go over the divorce papers. I agreed. As I was leaving, she asked me what my plans were for Judge George. Why are you going to worry about that? I asked, winking at her. Because I still handle a few criminal cases, and I think you might need a good lawyer. You engineers seem to not get too worked up about a lot of things, but I know you're pretty stressed, and your methodical approach to everything scares me. She handed me her card, and I left her office. Time flew by over the next 3 days. We were in the middle of a big project at the office, and it allowed me to focus on something other than my life. The old man even told me he was surprised how focused I was despite the upheaval in my life. I told him I was glad that at least things were going well at work. But on Friday night before I left, I told him about Tracy being served and about facing off with George, and I warned him that if things went sideways, I might be in jail by Monday. He assured me that he would support me and my bail. We left on a handshake. I got home and found another amazing-smelling meal being prepared by Tracy. She'd been trying her hardest lately to get me to focus on more of her skills. She's a truly amazing cook. I almost felt guilty, knowing what was about to happen after dinner. We ate dinner mostly in silence like we had for the past few weeks, although I did make sure to tell her how great the meal was. I'm not a heartless ingrate after all. Then I helped her clear the dishes, but as we were about to go into the living room to watch some TV that evening, the doorbell rang. It was almost 7. I knew it wasn't for me, so I didn't move to get it. Tracy looked at me oddly, then went to the door and opened it. A young man in a suit was on the porch, and he asked Tracy if she was Tracy Walters. When she replied yes, he handed her a brown envelope, said "You've been served," turned on his heel and left. Tracy didn't move from where she was standing, but I could see through her shaking shoulders that she was crying. I went past her, shut the front door, and took her by the shoulder to lead her back to the kitchen. She looked completely devastated, despite the fact that I had told her this would happen. We sat there in silence for what seemed like an eternity, but was probably only 5 minutes. Finally she muttered, "The son of a bitch," and ran upstairs to our bedroom. I didn't follow her. The hardest part was over. For one of the few times in our marriage, I didn't sleep in the same bed as Tracy that night. I went into the spare bedroom we had fixed up to be a guest room and slept there, although calling it sleeping was being generous. I was breaking up with the woman that, until a few weeks ago, I had considered to be the light of my life, my soulmate, my everything. Despite everything that had happened, we'd still slept in the same bed. I guess neither of us wanted to be the one to move out. But now it was over, at least in my mind. I woke up and showered, and as it was time to get dressed, I very quietly went into the bedroom and grabbed what I needed, trying my best not to wake Tracy and maybe get a head start on doing something. I didn't look to see if she was asleep, I just grabbed clothes and left. I was dressed in my usual casual garb, collared button-down shirt, decent levies, and my custom steel-toe cowboy boots that I had made for me when we'd visited our son at his place in Dallas. I left a little earlier than I really needed to. I didn't want to be late for this meeting. If I was early, I could always kill some time at a coffee shop, which is what I did. I stood on George and Jeannie's porch at 10 and pressed the doorbell. Jeannie, looking as lovely as always, but incredibly nervous, opened the door. "I'm sorry this had to end this way," was all I could say as she bent down to hug me hello. She didn't return the hug. She took my hand and led me down a hallway to the den, where George had all his mementos and photos arranged around the room. George was seated in his favorite armchair, but when we walked in, he rose from the seat. "Hello, Clark." "Hello, George." Jeannie looked terrified as she exited the room. So we stood about 6 feet apart, looking at each other. This was the man who I had once considered to be a brother. We were that close. George was 2 years older than me, about the same size, but a lifetime of ease had added about 30 pounds to him, 20 of which was in his gut. So we'd shared hopes and dreams, we'd partied together, fished together, hunted together. I was proud to call him my friend, proud of where his judicial career had taken him. Now, standing in front of me, judging me with his eyes, he wasn't my friend anymore, but my enemy, the man who stole my wife's affections, got her pregnant with his child, and ruined my life. Suddenly, I was furious. "You got to have my wife's heart, you son of a bitch," I yelled at him. "You got to have your clean image, because I promised Tracy I'd never tell anyone about this, and I don't break promises to that woman. But you don't get to keep your balls." At that point, I took a long, fast step forward with my left foot, and then I planted it and drove my right foot forward and up, aiming for a 50-yard field goal at the aforementioned target of his testicles. George reacted slower than I anticipated, and my steel-toe boot connected with his target squarely and decisively. I felt his testicles crunch as I drove my leg up as high as it would go, and then I heard him scream like a wounded animal. He fell to the floor, both hands clasped around his testicles, screaming like a hog being stabbed. Jeannie ran into the room at that point, saw her husband on the floor, and rushed to his side. He was still screaming in pain, and there really wasn't anything she could do to comfort him. She looked at me with anguish. I pulled my cell phone out of my pocket and dialed 911. "There's been an accident at Judge George Anderson's house," I said. "We need an ambulance here." I turned to leave the room, but before I could reach the door, Jeannie grabbed my right arm. I thought I might have to hit a woman, but instead of getting angry and upset, she seemed calm. She hugged me tight and whispered, "Thank you. We know what to do." I hugged her back, left the house, got in my car, and drove home, knowing the police wouldn't be coming to arrest me. Jeannie understood perfectly, and would explain things to her husband someday in the future when he could think straight. The drive home was quite relaxing, or maybe it was the kick to his testicles. I really don't know, but after months of my heart being ripped apart on a daily basis, I felt free now. It's funny, But once I finally understood the scope of Trish's deception, it took the sting out of it. And then I could think clearly enough to do what was right for myself. Maybe it wasn't the right thing for everyone involved, but sometimes you just need to take care of yourself. That's what everyone else had done for the last 20 years, so why shouldn't I now? Yeah, I know part of me will always love Tracy, but I'm not going to spend any more time contemplating this relationship. It wasn't my creation, and it wasn't my choice. It's time to move on. When I got home, I went down to the basement, grabbed a few suitcases, and went upstairs to the bedroom. I passed Tracy sitting in the living room, and she followed me upstairs to the bedroom. "So that's it?" she asked. Just like that. 31 years and out the door. "Tracy, I'm sorry that you were so wrapped up in yourself that you couldn't see how wrong you did me. You stole my love for the last 24 years with your deceit. You can't see it, and maybe you never will. But I've come to peace with it, and I don't hate you. I don't even hate George, even though he's probably thinking that right now, poor bastard. I'll come to peace with Barry and Katie sometime in the future. You might consider coming to peace with Marissa sooner rather than later. That poor girl has been through enough. Sign the papers, Tracy, and let's get this over with. I'll move the rest of my stuff out in the next few days. I don't think we need to talk anymore. If you have anything else you want to say to me, I left my lawyer's card on the kitchen counter." She stood there, stunned, tears in her eyes, but speechless. I grabbed my suitcases, went downstairs, and put them in the back of my truck. I went back into the house, grabbed a few odds and ends, and left. 31 years, just like that. I lied. Apparently, George had kept one of his balls. It took major surgery and months of agony, but they were able to save one of his testicles. I found that out from Marissa, who Jeannie had contacted to try to find me. Jeannie didn't have my number, and no one else in the family wanted to tell me. In fact, no one else in the family still talks to me. 8 months later, I'm okay with that though. The official word is that Judge George had a bad fall, striking his head on the corner of his ornate desk in his den, causing the injury, and then again when he fell to the floor. The press called it a home accident for politeness' sake and didn't mention it was to his nether regions. But he's gotten a lot of sympathy from the press. I guess that won't hurt his chances of getting on the Supreme Court shortlist. Tracy signed the divorce papers within a week, and the divorce was finalized last week. The house is going to be auctioned off. Tracy hasn't tried to call me since I left. Neither have Barry nor Katie. I guess I won't be invited to family Christmas dinner, wherever that will be. The old man is going to transfer the company to me effective New Year's Day, when he retires. The agreement is that I have to run the company for 7 years before I can retire a rich man with a golden parachute. Then he'll find someone to buy the company, and I'll get 10% of that deal as well. I've also started venturing back out into the dating scene. I guess that's what they call it. After being married forever, it will take a while for me to remember exactly how to do it. However, word of the divorce traveled fast, and some of our divorced friends have called to check on my dating preferences. In fact, a couple of Tracy's divorced friends have called, expressing their surprise that she could let me go. I have to admit, that felt good. I've got a good life ahead of me, with challenges both professionally and personally. I'm trying to find some new hobbies with my free time on the personal side. One hobby I've given up, however, is genealogy. Been there, done that.